We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It's Wednesday. We had a busy day yesterday, a lot of shit going on. So, we have plenty to talk about, and we'll go through it. I won't say quickly, but we'll talk about a lot of stuff on this particular show. Now, there was something that happened after all the other news stories settled in. And I'm not sure, but there wasn't a lot of interest in this, and I thought there would be. It is the Nevada primary or caucus or whatever they have out there. I don't even think the politicians were all that interested in it. I don't know that anybody went out and campaigned. Republicans only had one national level candidate and not much going on with it. But I will tell you this for the Democrats in the Nevada primary, Joe Biden received 89.8% of the vote. Marianne Williamson got 2.5% of the vote. There were fraction of a percent number of votes for a couple of people I've never fucking heard of. So Joe wins that easily, probably. Well, I think he was out there briefly, but the fact of the matter is not much talk about it. Now, the Republican side of this primary is what's interesting. As I've said, there's only one national candidate that's on the ballot there in the Nevada primary. But something interesting happened. Something that's got to be a slap in the face to Nikki Haley. Now, Nikki Haley was the only notable candidate from the Republican Party on the Nevada ballot, and she received 32%. There were a few other people that got a fraction of a percent that I didn't know who they were. But on the Nevada ballot, there's another place you can check, another vote you can cast, not for a candidate, but for an option. And that option is I vote for none of these candidates. Now, here's where the slap in the face is. Nikki Haley got what, 32.4%. Okay. Reasonable showing. But the votes for none of these candidates received 61.2%. So none of these candidates beat out Nikki Haley. That's not something you really want to have on your fucking resume. That's certainly not going to give her any confidence at this point. So anyway, that happened in Nevada. Nobody seems to care, especially the Republicans. So we don't need to go any further with that. We have some emails. And let's get to them. This first one comes from Craig. He says, "Hey, Boomer, I was just scrolling TikTok and I saw where the Orange Douche Canoe's appeal of total immunity was denied. Now that the appeal was denied, I'm hoping the January 6th case can move forward with no more holdups. Keep up the great work. Thanks for taking the time to read my email. Best, Craig." Well, he's likely to appeal it to the Supreme Court, but I don't think that will take too long. I'd be very surprised if the Supreme Court even takes it up. It's a ridiculous claim. The appellate court really made a very decisive decision and really laid it out pretty plainly, covered all of the claims by Trump's lawyers. So it's going to be very easy for the Supreme Court to say, yeah, now that sounds good. We've got other issues. We've got issues with the 14th Amendment. And that is going on today. We've got the Supreme Court hearing arguments on the Colorado Supreme Court's taking Donald Trump off the ballot by way of the 14th Amendment. So the Supreme Court is going to be listening to that. And at some point later, they'll come up with a decision on that. So that should be interesting. And so the Supreme Court's kind of busy right now. I can't imagine they're going to take up some ridiculous thing like absolute immunity when two courts have already said that's fucking ridiculous. All right, the next one comes from Alan. He says, "Mike, age seems to be a lot on voters' minds these days with politicians. There's a lot of stats on aging Americans still working after 65. Double over the last 35 years. One stat shows 19% of Americans over 65 are still working. My ultimate point to all of this is not to be a hypocrite. Then voters over 65 are too old to vote. 65 may not be the age, just using that as an example. Alan. I'm not sure what you mean there. I'm going to read that sentence again because I don't understand it. My ultimate point to all of this is not to be a hypocrite. Then voters over 65 are too old to vote. 65 may not be the age, just using that as an example. I'm not sure what you're saying, but there is no such thing as too old to vote. If you're somebody who lives in the United States and you are a citizen, you can vote, whether you're 21 or 121. I mean, I get your point. I know that there's more people working after 65. And something that people have to understand too, the people in the boomer generation, even though they're dying off at a clip of 5,000 people a day, the baby boomer voting block is pretty big. At one point, it was equal to the millennials. I don't know that it still is, but there's 50 million baby boomers. So while they may be old and you maybe want to push them to the side, they still have a lot of power and impact in this country. The only unfortunate thing is that there's a fair percentage of boomers that like the Republicans and Donald Trump. So hopefully they're too old to get off their asses and go vote. We don't need that kind of competition. All right, the next email. Hey, Boomer, thanks for straightening out Monday on my email. Please understand I'm 72. Grew up in New York, as you know. We all knew Stinky Pants Trump was a piece of shit 40 years ago. He beat being sued, screwing contractors, skipped on loans, you name it. Boasted about cheating banks on defrauding on loans. We all know what it's like to be against the wall and getting screwed, except guys like him, especially in court. Any thanks, I totally get you. Another observation, your thoughts on the report on the huge distribution of drugs like fentanyl, ketamine, among others, at the tune of $100,000 in the Trump White House. Maybe that's why they want the border to keep open, feeding the Fuhrer and his gang. My Jersey girl retired lawyer friend noted that the Supremes may not fool with the appellate court immunity decision since it's an unanimous decision. New and a great day. You do great work, Z-Man. Yeah, that whole thing, I think I talked about it with Old Soul, that whole thing about that drug list that they found in the White House with fentanyl and morphine and a bunch of crazy shit. You haven't heard them talk about it much. I don't know if they're going to investigate it or try to find out what's going on. But Donald Trump's Dr. Ronnie, who's now a representative in the House, somebody maybe needs to sit him down in a room and say, "What the fuck, Ronnie? Were you on drugs when you said that Donald Trump was an absolute physical specimen? You must have been, because look at this orange, sweaty piece of shit." I don't know what they're going to do with that. There's so many other more egregious things that they have to tend to that may go to the bottom of the list of things they look into. All right. The next one says, so Mike, MAGA couldn't even get this imbecilic impeachment past the House that they control. This comes as no surprise to any sane, rational people, but when is the GOP going to wake up to the fact that there's just not enough support or rationale for the Gates, Boebert, Green faction to be a factor? When is the right going to wake up to the fact that their own party doesn't give a damn about them? Just how fucking stupid do you have to be to support such corruption? I know there are corrupt Democrats as well, but at least they try to hide it. They don't come right up to your face and tell you that everything you're doing is self-serving. For the love of God, Republicans, wake up and smell the coffee. Take care, Paul. Paul makes an interesting comment about the Republicans attempting to impeach Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. They were all cocky and proud and ready to vote him in, and then they fucking failed. We'll talk about that story in a moment. But this was not a good day for Republicans. And you're absolutely right. There are some criminal motherfucking Democrats. And I found something out recently. I don't know if you've noticed this. You know Bob Menendez. Is he a rep or a senator? that got caught with all kinds of thievery and grifting. He's a Democrat. He's still in office. He won't resign, but he's probably going to jail. No surprise, you've got a politician who may be criminal. I don't know if you've seen on MSNBC. Um, there's a show called Deadline Washington or something like that. Nicole Wallace normally does the show, but she just had a baby and she has somebody filling in for her. And her name is, oh, what's her name? Alicia Menendez. Actually, I really like her a lot. There's not a lot of uh, hosts that I'm in love with that I think are doing a great job, especially the backups. But this Alicia Mendez does a very good job. So I thought, well, I got to see what her background is. So I Googled the woman, and guess what? Bob Menendez, the criminal fuck, is her dad. Go figure. I hate to see it if she has to do a story about his criminal fucking ass, her dad, on her show. She does a good job, and I'm not going to fault her because her dad is a fucking creep, but I just thought that was weird. All right. The next email says, "Hi, Mike. This past Sunday, I had a family gathering with my immediate family. My mom made the mistake of bringing up politics. My sister's boyfriend is a Trumplafuck. He mentioned most of the Trumplafuck's greatest hits: Hillary's emails, Joe is a pedo, gas prices were lower, Hunter Biden, Bill Clinton, and Epstein, just to name a few. I know I pissed him off by telling him he has been lied to. It wasn't long after I started hitting him with the facts that he and my sister left. Mom seemed horrified that I was going to vote for Biden. She kept asking me about other Republicans. While she agrees about Trump, she won't vote for Biden. She couldn't believe that I thought Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and the rest are jokes. Her only thing against Biden is his age and his support for Roe. She didn't want to accept that Biden was helped or has helped this country. My dad doesn't seem to understand that green energy is the future and will create jobs. He's focused on how limited the electric cars are now and is afraid of being forced to buy one. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. Elon Musk is going to come to your door and say, "Motherfucker, you better buy this car or there's going to be trouble." The email goes on and says, "As you said, things keep getting worse for Trump. The appeals court ruled against Donnie as we assumed. However, there were a few things that I thought were extremely important in their ruling. They are only giving Donnie 6 days to appeal before Tanya Chutkan can resume her case. That's ridiculously short in court terms. It's usually about a month. In the ruling, they said that Trump was an officer of the United States when he was president. That will probably come up when oral arguments start on Thursday in his appeal before the Supreme Court in the Colorado case. That, of course, is it's Thursday. I also saw that Judge Engeron said that he is reviewing the case about Alan Weisselberg committing perjury. He said, depending on what is admitted to, Judge Engeron could be able to assume all of Weisselberg's testimony was a lie. This could cost Trump even more money. Lastly, the House voted to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas, and I'm not surprised it failed. If I have the math right, with absences and vacancies, the Republicans couldn't lose one vote. They had 3 defect. They once again look inept. If they had succeeded, the Senate should have held the trial and forced the House Republicans to show the American people how partisan, pathetic, and corrupt they are. I don't know if they can try again. I think they can try again, and they might. I understood Steve Scalise wasn't there today or yesterday. He was getting some medical care. Now, remember, Steve Scalise has cancer. And I don't care. I wish him the worst. People will say, "That's terrible, Mike. You shouldn't talk that way about people with cancer." I don't talk that way about people with cancer, just Republican fucks with cancer. And hey, I had cancer one time when I was 29 years old. I had testicular cancer. I didn't go through a lot of shit. I don't even consider myself a cancer survivor because I really didn't go through anything but a few radiation treatments. There are a lot of people that struggle a lot with it. And all of them, I wish the best for and hope they get through it as quickly and as harmlessly as possible. Now, Steve Scalise, I hope he has a rough motherfucking time because he's proved who he was. Now, that email comes from Eric. He is from Iowa. And Eric, I'm sorry you had to go through that in your meal with your sister and brother in law. I'm not surprised. I mean, you're in fucking Iowa, for God's sake. And we know there's a lot of Trump humpers out there. Eric's kind of a unicorn in Iowa, being a liberal guy. These people will never learn. Uh, People like your mom, and I'm not trying to put her down. This is people in general, but people like your mom and your brother in law and your sister are woefully uninformed, and they have no ambition to learn more. They just want to hear what they want to hear, and then they want to parrot it constantly over and over again as if they're saying something of import or that is factual. And neither is the case. So I empathize with you. I've been through those very same situations, and I'd like to say there's a way to fix it. But from my experience, no way to fix it. When you're dealing with dumb fucks, you just got to let them go and try not to get in front of them again. All right, this was brought up in the email and in one of the emails, and this is one of the big stories that happened yesterday. A federal appellate court has unanimously rejected Donald Trump's argument that his attempt to overturn the 2020 election that he lost were official acts and therefore immune from prosecution, likely setting up an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, we've been talking about this on the podcast and on the TikToks, everybody freaking out. When are they going to come back with a verdict regarding Donald Trump's absolute immunity? And it was delayed. It took a little longer than people had hoped. And when it did, people started getting fatalistic and thinking, oh, the court case will never happen and this and that and the other thing. I said, just calm the fuck down. They got to come up with an answer sometime shortly. And now we know why it took so long to get this decision. It was a 57-page decision. It was immaculate. It was very well written. It was very strong. And there's no little bit or piece that you can pull out of it to give the Supreme Court some red meat to chew on in order to take up this appeal. The appellate court did all they could to make this bulletproof, and from all appearances, they did that. And if it's bulletproof and it goes to the Supreme Court and they don't think they can do anything or make any complaint because it's all been covered in the decision, they're just going to say, well, we're not going to hear this. Stick with what the appellate court said. That's what I think will happen. Now, unless the Supreme Court goes rogue and tries to help out Donald Trump, but I don't see that happening. I mean, the Supreme Court has had many opportunities to help Donald Trump, and they've found against him. So, with the 14th Amendment thing going on and the already troubled state they're in with their reputation, this is a silly argument. I can't imagine they're going to take it up, but we'll see. The former president had asked that the court to overturn District Judge Tanya Chutkan's ruling in December that Trump's actions were not part of his duties as president and that holding that office did not give him a get out of jail free card. And she was right. The Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit gave Trump until next Monday to file an appeal with the Supreme Court to get a stay of its ruling until the High Court decides whether to take the case. Now, that's a short time. Normally, they would give them a month, but the appellate court is getting tired of the waiting too, so gives him a week. So on Monday, he has to decide whether he's going to appeal. I think it's almost certain that he will appeal. He'll take one day delay to a year delay. He'll take whatever he can get. So it'll go to the Supreme Court, and I think the Supreme Court is sensitive to the fact that this is a time-sensitive situation, and they're going to want to address this relatively quickly. Now, the March date is gone. We won't get the March date back. As I understand what will happen when they reschedule this trial, when this appeal happened in like December, they put everything on hold. So that period of a couple of months was stagnant. So the moment they are able to reschedule the uh, um, the trial, they're going to need that add that month and a half, 2 months on. So we're really looking at earlier mid-May for the start of the trial. We don't know what she's going to say, but that's what it looks like right now. And even still, if it starts in May or even June 1st, that still puts us in front of the election and it will be fine. Um, there was an opinion stated that said, but any executive immunity that may have protected him while he served as president no longer protects him against this prosecution. Now, in a prepared statement, campaign spokesman Stephen Chung essentially repeated an argument that the coup attempting former president has repeatedly posted on his social media platform. He said, if immunity is not granted to a president, every future president who leaves office will be immediately indicted by the opposing party without complete immunity. A president of the United States would not be able to properly function, Chung wrote. President Trump respectfully disagrees with the DC Circuit's decision and will appeal it in order to safeguard the presidency and the Constitution. Well, it's interesting that he would say that every president would be indicted because they don't have immunity. Let's see, how many times prior to Donald Trump were presidents indicted? Oh, none. Not one former president was indicted. Now, of course, Nixon was pardoned by Gerald Ford, but other than that, nothing like this has ever happened. See, that's the difference. You don't have to be worried about being indicted if you aren't committing motherfucking crimes. And previous presidents don't or haven't committed the level of crimes that Donald Trump has, so they were not indicted. But you know, the other funny thing I think of is that Donald Trump says presidents should have absolute immunity. But just a couple of months ago, didn't he say as soon as he becomes president, he's getting a special counsel and they're going to investigate Joe Biden and prosecute him? Well, it doesn't sound like they can do that because in Donald Trump's mind, Joe Biden would have immunity. See, that's the thing about Donald Trump. It's all about him. It doesn't matter who else is involved. He doesn't look to the history. He doesn't look to the future. He's like a feral animal that's looking at what's going to protect him today. And so he says these things, but he has no idea what he's talking about. He has no idea that he's implicating himself or making himself look like a fool by opening that fat orange mouth. Now, in a thorough 57-page opinion, a three-judge panel of the appeals court systematically knocked down each of Trump's arguments for immunity. Trump claimed that the authors of the Constitution wanted to protect presidents from nuisance, politically motivated prosecution, citing a quote from Alexander Hamilton. But the judges ruled that Trump's lawyers were misrepresenting the gist of Hamilton's argument. You see, in the very next sentence of the same essay, Hamilton stresses that the president must be unlike the King of Britain, who was sacred and inviolable, the judges wrote. Remember what Judkins said, presidents aren't kings. Donald Trump's aren't kings. Or isn't a king. That's the thing about it here is he wants to be treated like a king or a despot or a dictator, special treatment. He wants to be able to go after anybody that he thinks commits crimes, but any crimes he commit are perfectly legal, or he's can't be implicated in them. I mean, didn't Nixon say in one of his speeches, not a speech, an interview, I think with David Frost, he said, well, if the president doesn't, it's not illegal. Well, Nixon was wrong there, clearly. He knew he could get indicted. That's why he begged for a pardon with Gerald Ford. He cut a deal, he got a pardon. He wouldn't have needed a pardon if he had absolute immunity, right? Well, that's interesting. And of course, when Donald Trump was getting impeached, his own lawyers stood up there and said, you don't have to impeach him. He's not going to get away with anything. He can still be indicted after he gets out of office. His own lawyers said that. But now Donald Trump changes his tune because he only cares about what affects him. He's not thinking about the country. He's not thinking about the office. He's thinking about saving his ass. And he's starting to look pretty silly in the process. Now, there was kind of a stunning blow to the Republican leaders. The House rejected an effort to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on Tuesday after a number of Republicans joined the Democrats in opposing it. Now, we know that there's a bipartisan bill coming to protect the border. Got all the things in it that the Republicans wanted, but now they want to shut it down. So it's really on the Republicans now for not protecting the border. But the ironic thing here is that they want to get Alejandro Mayorkas. For what specifically, we don't know. They've never laid that out. Apparently, like Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, there's no evidence, but they know it's trouble. Thing about it is they want to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas for not doing anything at the border, while all the while doing nothing at the border. Talk about hypocritical. Now, the final vote was 214 to 216, and it was embarrassing for Mike Johnson. You could see it on his face when he gavelled down and he kind of took off out of there quick, fast, and in a hurry. And this is an embarrassment for him. No question about it. He should have talked to Nancy Pelosi before he did this, because Nancy Pelosi's a little sharper about this kind of thing. She would never have brought something to the floor if she knew she wasn't going to win for sure. Apparently, Mike Johnson didn't know about that little strategy, and he looked like an absolute fool. Now, the vote was incredibly dramatic. It was tied at 215 to 215 for several minutes, with every Democrat voting no, along with three Republicans, Ken Buck, Tom McClintock, and Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. A tied vote meant the effort would fail. So Democrats began shouting order at Speaker Mike Johnson to drop the gavel and end it. Republicans were furiously prodding Gallagher to change his vote, but he wouldn't. At the last minute, Representative Blake Moore voted no, not because he opposed the measure, but because it would allow the House to bring it back up again another day. That bumped the final tally to 214 to 216. So they probably will bring it up again. But, of course, they did the vote on Kevin McCarthy 15 times before they got what they wanted. Republicans are noted and have a history of failing, so I don't have a lot of confidence in them. Republicans appear to be counting on one Democrat to be absent in order to squeak through the vote. Representative Al Green of Texas. He had been out following surgery, but he showed up for Tuesday's vote. Way to go, Al. He said, I always intended to be here, he told reporters after the vote. I had surgery, I'm recovering, but this was important. The whole effort was a political stunt with one goal: helping Donald Trump look tough on the border issues ahead of November's presidential election. The GOP's two articles of impeachment accuse Mayorkas of willful refusal to comply with immigration laws and the breaching of public trust. Now, these are the very same fucks that want to shut down a border plan, a border bill, one of the most stringent border bills in the history of this country, a border bill that has all the things they want, and they want to shut it down. But they're mad at Mayorkas because he didn't do anything. See the irony in that? See how ridiculous that is? Holy fuck. But they never produced any evidence that Mayorkas had committed crimes. See what I mean? They're going to try to impeach this guy, yet they have no evidence. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, for Joe and Hunter Biden? Now, they had no evidence, let alone crimes that met the threshold for impeachable offenses. The Constitution spells out the impeachment is reserved for rare instances of high crimes and misdemeanors like bribery or treason. Unfortunately, there were no such crimes. In the case of Mayorkas, a cabinet secretary charged with carrying out immigration laws, the GOP was essentially attacking him for policies it doesn't like. This wasn't about breaking the law. This was about politics. And that's not what this option is there for. Now, in the lead up to the vote, Johnson, who was a constitutional lawyer, touted his legal credentials and said he had no choice but to impeach. In my review and my understanding and everything I know and read and studied over the years, I don't believe there's ever been a cabinet secretary who so blatantly, openly, and willfully and without remorse did exactly the opposite of what the federal law requires him to do, Johnson said in a press conference. It's an extreme measure, but extreme times call for extreme measures. But a number of Republicans found Johnson's rhetoric unpersuasive, saying that while they may not agree with the Biden administration policies, it would be pointless and unconstitutional to impeach Mayorkas. Now, the interesting thing about this is where the Republicans don't think ahead. You know, they're talking about making Donald Trump uh, immune from anything and everything. And they say that if he's not immune, then they'll be going back and forth indicting every president hereafter. Okay. But you have to understand too, the same goes for these cabinet members. It's been over 100 years since they impeached a cabinet member of an administration, and it was legitimate. He whoever it was, I don't really recall the name, but it was a long time ago, and he committed high crimes and or misdemeanors, and he was impeached. But if you're just doing this for political reasons, the Republicans are trying to impeach Mayorkas because of political reasons. Who's to say that a Republican president doesn't get in? And since the Republicans got away with it this time, why wouldn't the Democrats pick out a cabinet member and do the very same fucking thing? It makes sense. See, they want to protect, this infighting and this back and forth with impeachments and crimes and all that stuff, but only when it potentially hurts a Republican. When it's a Democrat, it's cool. We can do whatever we want. Now, McClintock said the problem is that they failed to identify an impeachable crime that Mayorkas has committed. He wrote a 10-page memo criticizing his party's effort. In effect, they stretch and distort the Constitution in order to hold the administration accountable for stretching and distorting the law. McClintock echoed the previous sentiments of Buck, who was the first Republican to announce his opposition to impeachment. It's maladministration. Mayorkas is terrible. The border is a disaster, Buck told reporters last Thursday, but that's not impeachable. House Republicans could change immigration policies, and they don't like by passing bipartisan legislation through Congress. They've spent months screaming about the need to address the border, and in the Senate, some Republicans actually put in the work and unveiled a long-awaited bill this week with bipartisan support to change immigration laws. Yeah, and we know what they're going to do with that. They're going to cancel that thing in spite of the fact this is the best opportunity they ever have had, and this is probably the best opportunity they will ever have, especially when the Democrats take control of the House and the Senate and the White House come November. All right. We are going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. So it's Wednesday today, and today is the day that the U.S. Senate was supposed to bring up this bipartisan border bill. They were going to vote on it, or at least vote to see if they were going to vote, some preliminary bullshit. But now it looks like the Senate is trying to shut things down. Even one of the guys that was one of the co-writers on the bill is saying, yeah, maybe we should slow it down, which I find kind of interesting given the fact that they seem to have a lot of urgency about the horrific things down at the border, but now they want to slow it down. In fact, they maybe want to shut it down completely. And why would that be? Because it's not a good deal? Well, it's the best deal the Republicans have ever seen in terms of border plans. It's the most stringent border strategy in the history of this country. It's got all the things they asked for. Now, they do have a problem with also including money for Ukraine, but they're all about money to Israel. This is all about politics. And more than that, it's about Donald Trump saying, no, shut that down. I want to run on border problems, so we can't have the border fixed. We can't give Joe Biden a win, so just shut it down. Now, the interesting thing about it is that they're willing to do that for Donald Trump. And I made an interesting parallel between what the Republicans in the Senate and the House are doing by taking Donald Trump's lead and doing what he suggested. There's another group of people who have done the very same thing, and frankly, it hasn't turned out well for them. And you would think these intelligent members of Congress might have taken notice of this and maybe looked at another option. You've seen these court cases with Donald Trump. You've seen these inept and incompetent lawyers pleading his case. Now, the thing about it is, many of these lawyers are getting sanctioned or disbarred or admonished. They're not doing very well. And is it because they're shitty lawyers and don't know what they're doing? Well, that's part of it. But the other part of it is that Donald Trump thinks he knows everything. So he instructs these lawyers to do different things, even though these lawyers know it's absolutely stupid and bullshit and it's not going to work. But for whatever reason, they decide to take his lead and do his bidding. Well, he hasn't come out too well in those court cases. And as I said, there are lawyers getting sanctioned and disbarred and admonished. So these lawyers are listening to Donald Trump's direction, and they are failing every fucking time. So now Donald Trump is trying to exert that kind of control over members of Congress, and you would think the members of Congress would look over to those lawyers and say, oh, I don't want to do that. That's not a good idea. But they're not. They're doing the very same thing that the lawyers are doing, and they're also failing every time. You would think at some point in their lives or at some point in this whole process that they would learn a fucking lesson. They would see what's going on and they wouldn't repeat the mistake. But that's not what they're doing. That's not what they're doing at all. And this is putting the Republicans in a very tough situation. They've been screaming about the border, insisting that the border be taken care of. And now when there's a bipartisan bill because they're afraid Joe Biden will get credit for it, they're saying, no, put a stop to it. But the reason they're putting themselves in a bad condition is because they want to complain against the Democrats about the border, but now they can't because they're the ones shutting down the plans and the money and the people for the border. And Joe Biden spoke earlier yesterday on this after it looked like they were not going to pass this thing and not push it through. And he basically pointed out what I just pointed out, that the border needs to be fixed. We put together a bill that I will sign and we will get it fixed. It's more stringent than any other thing we've done on the border in history, and it gives the Republicans everything they want. But if you don't pass this bill, this is what Joe Biden is saying. I can guarantee you this is going to be part of the campaign all the way through November. And what Joe is basically saying is every time I talk, I'm going to say that it's the Republicans that don't want to fix the border. And the proof is in the pudding. You can see it by them not voting for this bipartisan bill. They are at fault, not Joe Biden. Now, see, it's kind of interesting. This is what the Republicans constantly do. They used to complain about abortion and Roe v. Wade and all that sort of stuff, but they got that overturned. So that's a talking point that's taken away from them. That's a fundraising point that's been taken away from them. They fucked up on that one. They should have never overturned Roe v. Wade. Their prospects would be much better if they hadn't done it. But they're too stupid, too arrogant, and that's what they did. Now, the same thing's going to happen with the border. A lot of people want the border fixed. They're talking about all the troubles. Joe's saying, I'm ready to fix it. I'm going to be tough on the border. I'm going to sign this bill. If I have to shut down the border, I will shut down the border. But the Democrats say, yeah, nah, let's wait. Or the Republicans say, yeah, nah, let's wait. That's not going to play well for them when it comes to the election in November. I'm sure they know that. It's just that the alternative is worse for them. And the alternative is pissing off Donald Trump. They're still frightened to death about doing that. But again, you should learn a lesson. He tells all the lawyers what to do. They lose and lose and lose. He endorses certain people and kind of guides their campaigns, and they all fucking lose. And now Congress is going to fall in line with the other fucks and find out exactly what they're going to get. They're going to lose again. There's no question about it. You would hope they would do better than this, but apparently they can't do that. So they're going to try to shit can this bill. It's going to be a big problem. We've got Ukraine who needs money. And for whatever reason, the Republicans don't want to give Ukraine money. Now, this is a no-brainer. Russia is attacking Ukraine. If they get through Ukraine and take Ukraine over, you know they're not stopping. They're going to go to Poland, which is NATO, or go to some other NATO nation. Then we've got a much bigger issue. We've got a world war because we've got every NATO country going against Russia. It doesn't look good for Russia if that happens, but this turns into a much bigger mess than necessary. What we really need to do is shut down Russia and not let them expand any more than they've got. You remember the crash of the Soviet Union with Ronald Reagan. We did some significant damage to that country, weakened them, and why would we now give them a lifeline to get strong again? But this is on the Republicans. They're all big supporters of Vladimir Putin and the Republican Party. So I don't know what to tell you. I don't know that this border bill thing will pass. I have this sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind, and I've said this before. You know, with the budget bills and how they're going to close down the country in the last minute, they pull it out. Call me crazy, but I have a feeling they may do the same thing on this sort of thing. Now, MAGA and those idiots don't know any better, but there are some more reasonably minded Republicans who see the quandary here. Give Joe Biden a win or take the blame for the border. Not really a hard choice. You don't want to take the blame for the border, and some reasonably minded people may force the issue. We get the Democrats and enough Republicans to vote for it, and it'll be fine. However, there's one problem. Even if it gets through the Senate, when it gets to the House, Mike Johnson says he won't even bring it up for a vote, and then it's going to be jammed up and it will never happen. However, we know Mike Johnson is a weak-ass bitch, a pussy-ass bitch, like he was with the budget plans or the spending plans. He caved to Joe Biden and the Democrats. And I have a feeling, I know the Democrats are really anxious to get this thing done. That's why they gave up so much on the border, because they know that Ukraine is becoming desperate and this could be catastrophic for the entire world, let alone the country. So they were able to give up a bunch in terms of the border to get this thing passed so they can send money to Israel and to Ukraine. Because they figure come 2024 in 9-10 months, Once January 20th of 2025 hits, all those motherfuckers will be gone and they can change it after the fact. They only have to live with this for 9 months. So Joe Biden's looking at the short game here. Let's get the funding to Israel and Ukraine, give them what they want. And then when they're gone, which will be soon, we'll change that all around. That's, maybe not sounding like the best option, but really at this point, it's the only option. And now they don't even want that option. So it's a mess, but I will tell you this, it's a good thing we have the likes of Schumer and Joe Biden leading this thing because they're all both smart, very savvy, and they've fucked over the Republicans many times before. So if anybody can do it, it will be those guys. Well, yesterday was a really bad day for Republicans. And let's be honest, they've had a really bad year. Everything they try, everything they do, they fucking lose. They are the loser party. They haven't won anything. I challenge anybody to tell me one thing that they've won of any importance, put it that way. There may be little things that they won, but it wasn't really that important. One of the big problems the Republican Party has right now, money. Why do they have problems with money? Well, they have fewer people supporting them, and they doled out a shitload of money to pay for Donald Trump's legal fees. 2016, they had $21 million in their coffers. It is 2024, they have $8 million. And they have Republican committees in various states literally going bankrupt. They are having a hell of a time getting money. And I'll tell you why. One of the reasons they're getting money, it's because of their Lord and Savior. Donald Trump tends to suck up a lot of oxygen as well as a lot of funding. You remember in the 2020 election, he collected all this money, kept it all for himself, and didn't give it to the Republican Party like he should have. If there is money out there to be had, you can guarantee that Donald Trump is the motherfucker that's vacuuming this shit up. And he's taking it right out of the Republican National Committee's coffers. Now, in 2017, Donald Trump basically placed Ronna McDaniel as chair of the Republican National Committee. As of yesterday, she says she's planning to step down from the role, according to the New York Times. McDaniel reportedly told former President Donald Trump, the party's likely presidential nominee, that she'll be stepping down shortly after February 24th primary in South Carolina. And the funny thing is, Donald Trump wants her out. He put her in that place, and now he wants her out because, of course, we know he only hires the best people. Now, CNN reported that McDaniel has offered to leave her position, citing one personal familiar with the matter. Now, when reached for comment, RNC spokesperson Keith Schipper said, nothing has changed. This will be decided after South Carolina. Now, her reported plans come as a support from Trump, who handpicked her to lead the RNC after winning the presidency. He's been publicly critical of the committee for holding primary debates among his rivals, events he has refused to participate. And I don't understand why he's complaining about it. These debates are essentially what the national committees do. It just wasn't expedient for him, so he bitched about it. And of course, the Republicans followed in lockstep behind him. And now she's on the way out. The thing about it is you've got an election coming up in 9-10 months. This is not the time you want to get rid of an RNC chair. But maybe they have somebody better to take her place. Kind of like when they kicked Kevin McCarthy out and they brought in Mike Johnson. Well, even though Kevin McCarthy is a piece of shit, this was definitely a downgrade bringing in Mike Johnson. And the chances are whoever they bring in to chair the Republican National Committee will be just as bad. And that's good. With this election coming up, the Democrats need every possible advantage, and a shitty RNC chair wouldn't hurt. Now, Trump made his feelings crystal clear in a Newsmax interview Monday, when he said he thinks McDaniels should leave her post. And surprise, surprise, yesterday she says, I'm leaving my post because God spoke, because God knows all. But he really doesn't. Every time he suggests something, it's always wrong. Now, on Sunday, he told Fox News that there'll probably be some changes at the RNC. Then on Monday, he posted on Truth Social after a meeting with McDaniel, Ronna is now the head of the RNC, and I'll be making a decision the day after South Carolina primary as to my recommendations for RNC growth. Donald Trump is a private citizen. 91 felony charges against him, 4 indictments in 4 separate jurisdictions. He's wearing pull-ups, and they're full of shit. And he's the man controlling the Republican Party. Sounds good to me. If we want Democrats to win, we need dumb fucks in leadership in Republican Party, and that's exactly what we've got. Now, several people familiar with this plan said Trump is likely to push Michael Whatley, chair of the North Carolina Republican Party, as a replacement in an election for a new chair. Whatley, according to the Times source, is a Stop the Steal guy who backs Trump's baseless claims about the 2020 presidential election being stolen from him. Yeah, put that guy in there. He sounds like quite a candidate. Now, earlier Tuesday, RNC Chief of Staff Mike Reed also announced his departure. So there's all kinds of disruption amongst the Republican National Committee, 9-10 months away from election. That's never good news. They don't need that kind of drama and that kind of confusion and chaos. But we know that Donald Trump lives for it, and we know that the Republican Party lives for Donald Trump, so they deserve one another. Let's talk about Judge Arthur Engoron. He's overseeing the proceedings in Donald Trump's civil fraud trial in New York. People are thinking that he may be considering a harsher than expected penalty for Trump as he prepares to issue a final ruling in the bench trial. And I just get a feeling that may come this week, maybe Friday. I don't know that for sure. He said he could take it up to the middle of February. By Friday, we're looking at the 9th. So if not Friday, probably early to mid next week. Anyway, the Daily Beast recently reported that Engoron was alarmed by the New York Times article from earlier this month about Alan Weisselberg, who was the former chief financial officer for the Trump Organization, planning to plead guilty to perjury for allegedly lying on the stand. Lying on the stand in the very same court case that Judge Arthur Engoron is overseeing, the fraud trial against Donald Trump brought by Letitia James. You can understand why he might be a little concerned by that. Little hard to make a decision when somebody fucking lied to you. So he needs to sort that out. And as was said earlier on in the story, this may cause more problems for Donald Trump. This may make the award a whole lot bigger. Now, Judge Engoron said, as the presiding magistrate, the trier of fact, and the judge of credibility, I, of course, want to know whether Weisselberg is now changing his tune and whether he is admitting he lied under oath in my courtroom at this trial. I do not want to ignore anything in a case of this magnitude. Now, Engoron added that he may use Weisselberg's alleged perjury as a basis to invoke falsus in uno, in reference to the term falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus, which is Latin for false in one thing, false in everything. This suggests that Engoron may disregard Weisselberg's entire testimony during the civil fraud trial as truthful and use that to inform his final judgment. See what I mean? Weisselberg's trying to do Donald Trump's bidding there, trying to do him a favor. And now, if Engoron sees he lied once, he's going to presume he lied about everything, and everything that Weisselberg gets thrown out. New York Attorney General Letitia James, of course, is looking for 300 $70 million in disgorgement penalties related to Trump allegedly inflating the value of his real estate's assets to obtain preferential tax and insurance rates. She also, of course, wants to have Trump and his adult children banned from serving as officers in any New York-based company for at least 5 years, if not forever. So you can see how this situation, Weisselberg will weigh heavily on Engoron's decision. Now, a massive penalty is a near certainty, as Engoron already ruled that Trump committed widespread fraud in financial filings submitted to the state. The decision was later upheld by the New York Appeals Court. However large the final judgment may be, it will be a significant financial blow to the former president, who's already got the $88.3 million in compensatory and punitive damages to writer E. Jean Carroll. That is problematic, and he's got 30 days to answer that and appeal it and put up the money, and we're probably 2 weeks away from his situation for doing that. Can you imagine that at some point in the next 30 days or next 15 days, he has to come up with 83 million and put it up so he can make an appeal? He already put the 5 million from the first case up, and then he gets hit with 370 million, 470 million, whatever it's going to be. And then he's going to have to do that within 30 days. That's not going to be possible. Donald Trump does not have that kind of cash. And then there's going to be a wholesale fire sale selling off of his properties, something that he has no control over because he's in receivership, and some third party will sell this stuff off, and they're going to try to sell it as quickly as possible. So that means it's going to be sold cheap. Now, in order to appeal any civil judgment in New York, the appellant must put a bulk of the judgment in a court-controlled account while the appeals process pays out. This means that if he's ordered to pay $370 million James is asking for, the ex-president would be almost $500 million poorer as he attempts to raise money for his presidential campaign. He's most certainly going to lose the case. Now, he already lost the case. That's the problem. Both Trump's attorneys and James' prosecutors have been ordered to respond to Engoron by email today at 5 p.m. New York time. So Engoron is basically saying, well, I heard Weisselberg lied. The fuck is up? They need to tell him exactly what is going on. I would trust Letitia James' side more than Donald Trump's side. They have a tendency of lying. So we'll see what happens with that. They're going to have to put those responses in today at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Now, as I said, the House took a big kick in the pants by not being able to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. That was an embarrassment, absolute embarrassment. But that wasn't the only bill they looked stupid on, because they had another bill last night. The House on Tuesday rejected a bill to provide $17.6 billion in aid for Israel, sinking Congress's latest effort to help its embattled Middle Eastern ally and throwing the fate of the future foreign aid into question. The tally was 250 to 180, short of two-thirds majority needed to pass the measure, with critics in both parties trying to join forces to quash it. Now, what they're trying to do here, they're trying to do something here. We know that in the border bill, there's money for the border, there's money for Ukraine, and there's money for Israel. Nobody's against giving money to Israel, but you can see what the Republicans were doing here. They were trying to do an end around the Senate and this whole bipartisan bill. They don't want to give money to Ukraine because they're buddies with Vladimir Putin. They're assets of Russian party and Vladimir Putin. So they thought they'd show everybody and say, well, we'll just give money to Israel. But once again, they fucking failed. That's all the Republicans do. Since Joe Biden's been in office, they've tried so many things. They thought they were so clever, but they do nothing but fail. So there were two important bills that they put up yesterday, and both of them, fucking both of them, failed. What kind of Speaker of the House even does that? Now, the stunning vote marked a defeat for Speaker Mike Johnson, who has opposed Democratic efforts to combine new Israel funding with other security provisions, including aid for Ukraine, and sought to pressure Democrats into swallowing the Israel piece as a standalone bill. Instead, Democrats voted overwhelmingly against the measure, siding with their counterparts in the Senate, who are still fighting for a broader foreign aid package, and President Biden, who vowed to veto the bill if it reached his desk. Now, Johnson's little gambit here also undercut by conservatives in his own GOP conference, whose opposition had nudged the speaker to put the bill on a fast track course, setting the threshold for passage at a higher 2/3 level, and whose no votes on final passage ensured it didn't hit that mark. Conservatives were protesting Johnson's decision not to offset the Israeli funding with changes elsewhere in the budget, meaning the aid would have to be added to federal deficits. Now, on the policy, Democrats are broadly supportive of the move to provide Israel with a new round of military aid, but the GOP's Israel-only bill excludes other provisions they favor, including humanitarian assistance for Palestinians in Gaza, help for Taiwan, security funding for the U.S.-Mexico border, and new military funding for Ukraine. See, they thought they were doing something there, and of course, again, they failed. Now, among those provisions, the Israel portion enjoys perhaps the most bipartisan support, and heading into Tuesday's vote, Democrats were wary of separating out the popular provision that would help catalyze passage of a broader national security package in the future. I don't think anybody can accuse him of being anti-Israel, said Representative Emmanuel Cleaver, referring to Biden. But he knows that if we pass this, the other stuff is dead. So House Republicans echoed that apprehension. House Intelligence Committee Mike Turner told CBS Face the Nation on Sunday that he was very concerned about Johnson's strategy to delink the foreign assistance provision for fear that Ukraine aid would ultimately be passed over. And you know as well as I do, that's exactly what the fuck they are doing. They're trying to play a game. They're trying to do something. And once again, they fail. All right, we're getting close to the end here. Republicans led by Matt Gaetz, that guy, we love him, want Congress to declare former President Donald Trump innocent of engaging in insurrection. Oh, yeah, that will work. Gaetz and 62 House Republicans introduced a symbolic resolution simply stating that Trump did not engage in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. First of all, that's never going to pass the House. And even if it did pass the House, it has no bearing on what the legal system is going to do. Like I've always said, Republicans are all about performance. They're not about any kind of substance. They just have to make it look good for their Lord and Savior, Donald Trump, and dumbfuck Donald Trump would be overjoyed by something like this, even though it did him no good, because it's all about appearances, not about actually doing something. Now, this is just the latest effort of Republicans trying to whitewash Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. More than the House impeached Trump shortly after the attack for the incitement of insurrection. He was acquitted by the Senate. Now, the House resolution comes as the Supreme Court weighs whether state officials can keep Trump off the ballot for having engaged in the insurrection. 14th Amendment to the Constitution adopted after the Civil War. Now, we know opening arguments are going to be given in front of the Supreme Court tomorrow. That will start the process with this whole 14th Amendment issue. Whether the Supreme Court will side with the Colorado Supreme Court or they'll let Donald Trump stay on the ballot. nobody really knows what's going to happen, but there's a lot of support for excluding him from the ballot. Now, people have said, well, yeah, that's just one state, but you have to understand that will start an avalanche. If the Supreme Court finds that the Supreme Court in Colorado was correct and they stand behind it, then every other state will go through that process, every other state that wants to go through that process, and they won't be able to take it to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court has already made their decision. So it is going to be a domino effect if they side with the Colorado Supreme Court. Fact of the matter is, we don't know if they are going to do that. We have no clue. I mean, theoretically, if they are truly constitutional originalist, they should, but they're also corrupt motherfuckers that support Donald Trump. So we have to see what's going to happen. The good news is that the Supreme Court has already found against Donald Trump on many levels and many things. So it's not a done deal. They're not totally in the pocket of Donald Trump, but they're enough that we need to be concerned. And I think we all are concerned about this. But we'll see what happens. As I've told you, this next week to 10 days is going to be a busy motherfucking time. And none of it is going to be good for Donald Trump. And yesterday was a shit day for Donald Trump and the Republicans. All right, we're going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I hope you have a great day. We, of course, will talk to you again tomorrow.